This sitting is resumed. Honourable Member for Christ yourself.
I'm obliged to you, Your Honour. When we adjourned before the recess, I may have made the general point that the Social Empowerment Agency can consider itself the custodian of all the rights of those of disability. And I would want to encourage the community of those of disability to see that Social Empowerment Agency as such, as the custodian of all of its rights. And where those rights are abridged, that there should be immediate application to that agency or immediate complaint to that agency, which will be charged with the responsibility of referring that grievance to the Disabilities Tribunal. We also made the point that so entrenched are the rights of the disabled that those rights received attention as far back as the mid-1970s. I think the Succession Act was passed in 1975, prior to the change of government, and that act gave early recognition to the rights of the disabled, so that upon the death of a testator, and that is to say, upon the death of a person who had made a will, whether he had made provision for a disabled child or not, that Succession Act guaranteed to a disabled person of any age, a disabled child of any age of that deceased testator, the guarantee of 3/4, 75% of the estate, where, for example, that testator died and left a spouse, in this instance a wife. The wife, where there's a disabled child, the wife had a guarantee of 1/4 of that estate, so that 75% of that estate would be guaranteed to the disabled child of that union for his or her upkeep, hopefully until the unhappy event of death. Now, Your Honor, I wanted to extend my legal intervention penultimately, to the question of insurance. And that's a very interesting question with which this act deals. Perhaps I should read it as an introduction to the topic. It does raise an issue which will be very interesting and which will have implications for how insurance companies will consider their status in relation to the disabled. Clause 51(1) says that a person with a disability shall not be denied insurance solely on the basis of his disability. Let me analogize with motor vehicle insurance. The law certainly is that third-party insurance is compulsory. In other words, if you have a vehicle, you must insure that vehicle against the risk that that vehicle may enter into an accident and cause loss to what we call a third party. In other words, someone other than the driver who is affected, which is to say a passenger in the car, or a pedestrian, or a person not in the car but who was affected by an accident into which that car became involved. That is called third-party insurance. And the law says that you cannot drive a vehicle unless it has at least third-party insurance. Now, that is nice theory, because there is no law that forces any insurance company to offer insurance to a person. So that if you buy a car and no insurance company trusts you enough to sell you third-party insurance, far less comprehensive insurance, you have to catch the bus. Now, or drive illegally, precisely. Now, in this event here, the law has not gone as far as to compel any insurance company to sell insurance to a disabled person. And you know, sir, why that is so. The essence of contract, which is what insurance is a contract between you and the insurance company. But the essence of contract is that it should be voluntary. You cannot force a man to enter into a contract. If you force him to, it is not a contract. But the law here wishes that insurance companies, and the law can only wish that an insurance company would sell insurance to all disabled persons. So that we can say the farthest this law goes is that it seeks moral suasion. It seeks to persuade the insurance company to sell insurance to a disabled person. And it says, I read again, a person with disability shall not be denied insurance solely on the basis of his disability. Let us read subsection 2 to make the point further. An insurance provider shall not offer insurance services to a person with a disability at a cost which is significantly higher than the cost offered for the same coverage to a person who does not have a disability, unless any increase in cost is reasonable based on the cost of providing such insurance or the cost of reinsurance. All that is saying is that an insurance company cannot discriminate. Two parties come, one is this of disability, the other is well able. The price must be the same. In other words, the insurance company cannot increase the cost of insurance to the person of disability simply because he is disabled. But we have found nothing yet in the legislation that can force an insurance company to sell insurance to a disabled person. The Act has not done that because, as I've said, there's this common law position, well-protected common law position, that says the essence of contract is its voluntary nature. It's like marriage. You can't force a man to marry a woman or vice versa. It is a contract and it has to be voluntary. So how do we protect persons of disability in this dilemma? It's a conundrum, really, because here it is, the law is trying to protect persons of disability. The law is trying to ensure that persons of disability will have insurance coverage, but because of the law, the common law, it can go no farther. Now, how must Parliament resolve this dilemma? Since we're trying to protect persons of disability, I wonder if the government, as that ultimate custodian of the rights of disabled persons, should not consider its own intervention. We are agreed that, like third-party vehicle insurance, you can't force an insurance company to sell insurance to anybody. Here it is, a similar conundrum. The government, through this legislation, cannot force an insurance company to sell insurance to a person of disability. How do we resolve that dilemma? My own humble suggestion is that government should consider intervention by providing a reinsurance fund, so that if a person goes to an insurance company and the insurance company exercises its contractual right not to bargain, not to enter into a contract, they may pause and consider that they have been asked by government to enter into an arrangement in which they become party to a reinsurance fund. That is what companies do. They take your premium and they reinsure, so that when they pay you out, they go to their reinsurer and they don't lose, really. They hardly ever lose. If the people of the world think that insurance companies are there to lose. They're not. It's a business like any other, and the motive is profit. So that government, knowing this, out of the considerable monies that it collects as a government, and lawfully so, I wonder if government may not consider a reinsurance fund not to guarantee the insurance company profits, but to protect those whom we claim to love and those whom we claim to wish to protect, the disabled, so that if there's any disabled person who the company believes is not a risk worth insuring, that they can assume that risk on the basis that there's a reinsurance fund available. And here is how we can make the point further. Section 51, subsection 3 says, nothing in this act prohibits an insurer from denying insurance to a person with disability where this decision, A, was arrived at by reference to actuarial or other data from a source on which it was reasonable to rely and was reasonable having regard to the data and other relevant factors. That's making the point that I made, Your Honor, that the insurance company can use its actuarial data, its usual business efficacy, and say, look, this is not a risk that I am prepared to insure. And that's a business decision. And it affects the disabled person adversely as it would affect another person, except that the law recognizes that that is a right, a contractual right that the insurer has. Recognizing that the insurer is not there to make a loss, he's there to make a profit. And that he can say, look, I don't want this risk. And the insured, the potential insured, being the disabled person, can do nothing because the statute, the legislation allows the company to act upon principles of business efficacy and to deny the person, except that as a compassionate parliament, we don't wish to deny that small community, relatively small community of disabled persons the right of access to insurance. Again, my humble suggestion is that the government should intervene and establish a reinsurance fund to guarantee the insurer that in the event that he has to compensate the person of disability, in the event of loss, the government guarantees that there's a fund of reinsurance. I believe, Your Honor, that is the way a compassionate government would wish to resolve that issue. I make the contract point again. Section 51, subsection 2, and this is to make the point in contract that a contract has to be voluntary. And as you know, Your Honor, the three elements of a contract. A contract is constituted only where there's offer, and in this event, the offer is made by the insurance company. Acceptance, that is to say, by the person of disability. And the technical term we use as lawyers, consideration. In layman's terms, that's the price. So you have an offer, the insurance company makes the offer, the person of disability accepts the offer, and then the two parties agree to the consideration, they agree to the price, they agree to the premium. And that codifies and recognizes the principle that a contract is not consummated until and unless there's offer, acceptance, and consideration. I repeat, in that legal circumstance, you cannot fault the insurance company legally. I repeat, Your Honor, that what the government needs to consider in this event is a reinsurance fund, not solely to guarantee to the insurance company a profit, but to guarantee to the person of disability the prospect, and not only the prospect, but the reality that he will have access to insurance like all other persons, since you cannot force the insurance company to insure him place the insurance company in a position in which it will have access to a fund of reinsurance. I hope I have made the point. And of course, as I've said, the Act itself says that you cannot force an insurance company to sell insurance to anyone, including a person of disability. Of course, the Act is not without some compassion. The Act goes on to say that the insurance company should not unreasonably deny the person of disability access to insurance, but that's another issue. If, of course, the person of disability believes that the denial has been unreasonable, he goes to the custodian of all the rights of persons of disability, the Social Empowerment Agency. And the Social Empowerment Agency is empowered by law, by this law, to make an application to the Disabilities Tribunal and bring the insurance company to defend this action of refusal. So that the Act tries its best. Except, sometimes we tell people, you know, your issue is not only legal, your issue is financial. And this seems to be a financial dilemma, definitely for this person of disability and for the insurance company, who then resolves that financial dilemma. I repeat, Your Honor, the government ought to resolve that financial dilemma by establishing a reinsurance fund so that all should leave this transaction in a state of happiness. I don't imagine that with the size of the community of persons of disability, that this fund would bankrupt this country. It wouldn't. It certainly would not. So that is my humble suggestion. I will close, Your Honor, on the question raised by Section 26 of the Act. And I think the public needs to know this because I want to focus on the sections of salient legal interests. And this one is very short. Section or Clause 26 reads, under the rubric void contracts, and I quote, any contract for the provision of goods, facilities, or services, or any other agreement shall be void insofar as it purports to deny any person of any rights or privileges conferred under this Act or in any other way that limits the operation of this Act. All that is written to mean that there can be no contract made which seeks to deny a person of disability any of the rights conferred under this legislation. So that it is a general provision, again, that seeks to protect the rights, interests, and entitlements of persons of disability. I mean, we can think of almost any arrangement, any contract that two parties may enter into which tend to disadvantage or to prejudice the rights of persons of disability. This legislation is saying, no, you cannot do that. You cannot make such contracts. Such contracts are void. And when a lawyer says, whether by way of contract or treaty, that something is void, it means it has never been valid. It means, as we say in legal parlance, void ab initio. Ab initio is just a Latin phrase meaning from the beginning. I say that because one needs to make the distinction between the word void and voidable. Void, when the word void appears in legislation, it has never existed. It has never had legality. As opposed to the word voidable. Voidable means that the court, the law will recognize the existence of the transaction until such time as it is declared a nullity. And that is the fundamental difference between the words void and voidable. This legislation makes it clear that any contract which is made to the prejudice or disadvantage of a person of disability, that it is void from its very beginning, from its inception, void ab initio, it never existed. The legislation has not said voidable, so that no one can come to a court, no one can come to the tribunal and seek to argue that for some short period the transaction had legal validity. It does not have legal validity, and quite simply, Section 26 has described such transactions as never having existed at all. And I make that point to make the distinction between void and voidable. So that generally speaking, I think the minister would have dealt with the sections on education. I interpreted it as my duty to deliberate on matters legal, and those, to my mind, are the salient legal issues that arise under this legislation. I will not quarrel with the effort of the legislator to guarantee rights to persons of disability. I will not quarrel with that. As I said when I began, there are times when a parliament must join itself in causes that are noble. Today, Your Honor, although I sit in this position, I have no difficulty in disclosing that this is an exercise in social nobility. And I want to commend it, except with the reservation that I think what I proposed at Section 51 under the rubric of insurance may now be considered, because persons of disability, their rights are still limited, certainly in relation to insurance contracts. As I said, analogizing with third-party motor vehicle insurance, the law compels the owner of a car to have at least third-party insurance. But there's no insurance company that has ever been compelled by any law to sell third-party insurance to a vehicle owner. Similarly, with this legislation has not attempted, nor does it intend to force any insurance company to sell insurance to a person with disability, except that if that refusal is unreasonable, an application may be made to the Disabilities Tribunal. But the fundamental point is this: the legislation has not intended, it has not attempted to force insurance companies to sell insurance to all persons of disability who are interested. Of course, a portion of Section 51 attempts some moral suasion. That is as far as it goes. But moral suasion and legal obligation are qualitatively and quantitatively different matters. Again, I plead with the government to consider that reinsurance fund to resolve the issue, because as much as we wish to do in relation to the rights of persons of disability, as much as this legislation wishes to do in relation or for persons of disability, it cannot breach that fundamental common law provision that you cannot force persons to enter into a contract. That's the law. And I have proposed that the solution to law is financial. Now, you are aware, Your Honor, that there are several occasions when the law creates injustice. The law creates injustice. And in the old courts of England, they used to go to the Chancellor, the Chancery. And the Chancery used to be described as the keeper of the king's conscience. The law is the law. And law, as Oliver Wendell Holmes would have said, is logic, is an accumulation of logic. He didn't say those exact words, but that is what he meant. The law being an accumulation of logic still on occasions produces injustice. And this section 51 can possibly result in injustice. Under the old system, when the law produced injustice, you went to the Court of Equity. And the Court of Equity created rules based on fairness. And those rules of fairness represented exceptions from the law, except that they develop and advance the rights, interests, and entitlements of all parties. We don't have the application of the rules of equity applicable here. So that while equity was itself a higher system of law, that higher system of law has no application here. And therefore, the solution is financial. Please, Mr. Speaker, do seek to persuade the government to create that small fund of reinsurance. I'm no insurance expert, but please try to create that reinsurance fund so that if we are saying to the members of this precious community that we are guaranteeing you your rights, extend those rights, and please create that financial zone of relief for this community that we must love, even if they're not our friends or relatives. We must love them as God, as the Honourable Member said, as God mandates, that we must love our neighbor. So that is a good point at which to end, Your Honor, on the issue of the greatest of the virtues, loving our neighbors as we do ourselves. Your Honor, I'm obliged for your patience. Thank you, sir.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I beg to move a motion for the suspension of Standing Order 31. This standing order relates to the length of time which an honourable member has to speak, which is usually 30 minutes, unless it is the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition or the person moving the actual debate. Obviously,
Standing Order 31, Honourable.
Sorry?
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Sorry?
Standing Order 31.
31.
31.
31. Continue.
I'm with you.
As you are aware, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for St. James North, who I believe wishes to speak next in this debate, has not only been instrumental in allowing us and certainly the government as well as the Honourable Minister to be able to bring the policy for disabilities, but he's been also a long-standing advocate in this area and also the chairman of the National Advisory Committee on Disabilities. And it is our belief that the Honourable Member should be given the extended time to be able to make his presentation, given his depth of knowledge of the area and certainly his advocacy over the course of the last few years.
European judges are yeah. I ain't seen it. 31. 31. Wait, that's it. I remember you means 30 subsection 1. You say 31. Right. But 31 in the budgetary proposals. Right. So it's 30 subsection 1. Right. The question is that Standing Order 30 subsection 1 be extended so as to permit the Honourable Member for St. James North to speak beyond the normal allocation of 30 minutes. All those members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Honourable Member St. James North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you for your permission to be able to speak longer. I wish to start by saying that this is an historic and day of tremendous significance in this Parliament, sir. When this Parliament has recognized that it has to redress the decades of wrongs committed against people with disabilities. In my submission, Mr. Speaker, this bill ranks alongside and will so be judged by political historians in the future, along with the great pieces of social legislation led by the Parliament of the Right Excellent Sir Grantley Herbert Adams in the 1950s, legislation such as the abolition of the law which located labourers to the tenantries on which they worked, and when they left those tenantries, those plantations seeking better employment, they had to move the chattel house. And legislation such as the Holidays with Pay Act, and legislation which abolished, for example, the compulsion of women who were not married, that when they got pregnant, they had to leave their employment in the public service. It also equates in my submission with legislation of the 1960s under the Right Excellent Errol Barrow, the National Insurance Act, and legislation bringing in school meals, free school meals for children. And then the Succession Act, 1975. Then legislation under the Right Honourable Tom Adams, and recently demised Sir Henry Ford, sir, the Status of Children Reform Act, which gave children born out of wedlock equal rights as children born within wedlock, and prima facie establishment of paternity for those children. And then when you get into the 80s, it equals the landmark Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act of the Tom Adams government, sir. This act in the future will be seen to be at a similar level of those acts, because people with disabilities globally make up, what, 1 million people. It is estimated 15% of the world population. In the Caribbean, it's a bit less than that. Sorry, not 1 million, sorry, 1 billion people globally, roughly 15% of the world's population. In the Caribbean region, estimated to be about 1 million. 10% of the population in the Caribbean. In Barbados, it's estimated to be a bit less than that, maybe about 8%. Could be more, so that's the truth, because we've had COVID, we've had chikungunya that has left those who survived it, thankful to God, but now with some form of disability. So this is a fact in terms of the upliftment of a most vulnerable category of person in this country. And the facts are, sir, Caribbean Development Bank reports, United Nations reports speak to it. As recently as 2022, CDB 2018, that people with disabilities make up a substantial percentage of those who live below the poverty line in the Caribbean, and indeed in Barbados too. So we are today doing, sir, what you should come to Parliament to do. Anyone who seeks to come to this Parliament should be prepared and should have as their first priority doing social justice to those who are most vulnerable, most disadvantaged, financially, socially, and otherwise in this country. And that is what we are here doing today. It makes me absolutely proud, sir, to be part of a government that has brought this legislation. So as I've done previously, sir, as recently as 10 weeks ago, when we debated the national policy on disabilities, the resolution, I really wish to commend the Cabinet of Barbados for seeing this through, helping us reach this stage, and the Honourable Prime Minister herself, sir, who made a commitment when we were sworn in as members of Parliament, as Cabinet Ministers at State House, just after the last election, end of January, that the Commission on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities will be immediately established, that I would lead it, sir. And the relationship to get us to this position that the committee, and I personally, sir, have had with the Honourable Member for St. Michael South really has been exemplary. And really wish to thank him as well for this. The stakeholders in the cause, all 21 organizations, their leaders, the National Council, the Council for the Disabled, especially Ms. Rosanna Truder, not allowed to call names, but I called it in her name in a positive light. And this is really a bill in their name, formulated by them. I mean, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition spoke about the legislator and the social policy experts, etc. Look, it's a combined effort by everyone. I mean, as a committee, we met 3 times in the first instance town hall meetings with all the organizations for persons with disabilities. We met a further 4 times with everyone nationally. Then Senator Andrely Boyce from the other place and I were called back, retained for 2 months by the Ministry of People Empowerment to provide more consultations, both nationally and with people with disabilities. There's a saying by people with disabilities, nothing for us without us, and that is what this has been about. And that is why there is, in my submission, national consensus on this. And the Honourable Senator Monite in the other place last year, during the estimate, spoke about this, the fundamental significance and importance to address legislatively and policy-wise the needs of persons with disabilities. And in fact spoke about the callousness of people who park in car park spaces reserved for people with disabilities when they are able-bodied, and said she herself, if given the job, would be willing to go around Barbados and find people such as them if given the opportunity. And it's pleasing today, so I must say this, sir, to hear the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, exactly 10 weeks after we debated the resolution on national policy, where he admitted that he knew very little in terms of the issues and that he hadn't studied it academically. He has obviously done a little research since then. And it's pleasing to hear him come today to join hands, as he ought, with us on this issue. Because as I said from the beginning, there can be no political divide on this. It was the Barbados Labour Party government that signed the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It was the last Democratic Labour Party government, just after the 2013 election, which brought me into this Parliament, that ratified that convention. It is true that after that, the last Democratic Labour Party government did themselves and the people with disabilities an injustice because in March 2015, I brought a resolution, private members' resolution to this Parliament during the month of the disabled in 2015, calling on the government to at least debate the issue. Debate the issue and move towards bringing this legislation to Parliament. And I initiated meetings with the then Minister of Social Welfare. Can't remember what it was called then, the ministry, but social care on the issue, because I said, look, it's not about me, I want to see this legislation passed, brought to Parliament, and if I have to help you all, I am here to help you with it. But nothing was done, although promises were made, until the very last moment. The Honourable Minister for People Empowerment referred to it today that a disabilities bill was sent to the Council for the Disabled. I was a director of the council at that time. In March 2018, in other words, 2 months before the election was called, and in fact, a couple of weeks before Parliament dissolved itself, bringing a disabilities bill, which obviously could not come through within that space of time. And we all agreed, Council for the Disabled agreed, everybody, that this bill was not really fit for purpose because it was obviously rushed at the last minute. So we are here today, sir, as a result of joint efforts by everyone. Stakeholders, Law Reform Commission led by Sir David Simmons, sir, indebted to him, to that commission, rather, retained Dr. Jason Haynes, absolutely brilliant professor, now at University of Birmingham, then Deputy Dean of the University of the West Indies Law Faculty, to draft this bill, helped draft it based on the input from the Commission and based on what we gathered from everyone. All the over 60 meetings initially that we had, and then we went back and had about 10 more. And meeting with the Democratic Labour Party, meeting with the party of Bishop Joe Atherley, sir, Senator Andrely Boyce and I went into the Democratic Labour Party and met with them for the second time. First time was by Zoom. So that's what it is about, and that is the Barbados that we really long for in terms of consensus politics on issues of fundamental social importance. Then, sir, there are others, numerous to call, but it has been an input, and of all the ministries of government are involved in this, and as I've done before, and it is worth repeating, all the meetings we had with all the ministries, that they had ministers led their teams. That's the truth. In each and every meeting with a ministry that the commission had was led by the minister, because they realized the importance of this, of doing this. In a situation where people with disabilities are institutionally discriminated against and have been throughout the history of this country in terms of every aspect of life. And therefore, sir, 3 years, because it's almost 3 years since the last election, in less than 3 years, we've had a policy, now national policy, which has the fundamental parliamentary cloth. October the 29th last year, and exactly 10 weeks after, we're now debating this disabilities bill, which, if I may say, Mr. Speaker, when enacted into our legislation, will be the most transformative, comprehensive, wide-ranging, modern piece of legislation in the Caribbean region. Now, sir, sometimes it's a good thing in coming late to the table, because there's 6 CARICOM countries, Caribbean countries, including Guyana, Jamaica, Bahamas, Belize, that have disabilities legislation. But we were able, obviously, to see what they have come up with and look to improve on what they have produced. As we speak, our CARICOM sister nation, Trinidad and Tobago, is about to debate a national policy on disabilities together with the bill. I think the intention, as their minister in charge has told me, is to debate both together. And we're in close contact with them on the issue. But we were behind other Caribbean countries. In fact, we're behind the whole world. There are many African countries that have this legislation. South Africa, Kenya have had it for a long time. And many of us, I believe all of us, have seen, and many in the wider Barbadian public, have seen a presentation by a Kenyan MP who is blind. And it's astonishing to see the depth of her intellect. And in Kenya, in fact, there are reservations within their parliament for persons with disabilities. While representing Barbados at ACP EU conferences, Kenya invariably always sends a person with disability as part of their delegation. So we are behind, but this act redresses the imbalance, this bill, and we will now be ahead. And this is not me saying that, sir. This is accepted by experts on disabilities policy and law in the Caribbean who have said that this act is now the standard bearer of what legislation within the Caribbean ought to be in terms of people with disabilities. So let me upfront address the one concern or challenge, I don't even know if I could call it that has been raised by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, who has, to use his words, described this piece of legislation as an act of social mobility. But his one concern is on the insurance and which I will, and I'll speak more on the insurance aspect in itself, but I address this particular point, that he's correct in saying you can't compel anyone to go into a contract. I mean, that's basic contract law, enforceability, privity of contract, etc. But I want to suggest that the fund he is talking about, the reinsurance fund that he has called on the Ministry of People's Empowerment and indeed the government to create, is addressed in Section 80 of the bill. The national establishment of the fund, whereby a national development fund for persons with disabilities is to be established under the Act. That Act shall be a permanent fund. Income from the fund shall be used for the benefit of persons with disabilities and their organizations. Funds should be administered by the Social Empowerment Agency through a board of trustees. Clearly, that board of trustees will be a board of expert individuals, people trained in finance, in business, and investment. And that fund can address the concerns of the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, because sources of the fund will comprise income generated by investments made by the trustees, donations from international, regional and local donors. And indeed, with the enactment of this legislation, the Barbados government will now be open to a lot more international aid, financial and otherwise, than it was before, from people and from organizations concerned about persons with disabilities as a group of very vulnerable persons. So international funding can come in, sir, into this fund, and obviously money voted from Parliament. So that fund, I want to suggest, can be used, and I'm sure will wisely be used to address those kind of concerns, legitimate concerns, I must say, raised by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Sir, that having been said, I think it is my duty as well to go into some of the legal principles of this act. And when you look, I mean, the act itself speaks to the tribunal, the social empowerment agency, and the social empowerment agency is an extremely novel concept. It's an agency that will come into being with the enactment of the family services legislation that the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South has promised to bring very shortly before this Parliament, amalgamating the National Assistance Board, National Disabilities Unit, Child Care Board, and the welfare department. Extremely novel. This social empowerment agency is going to have tremendous importance within this country, because it's going to be treating towards the most vulnerable. In a situation, sir, where, let's admit, that under both governments, there has been deficiencies within our welfare system and its ability to deliver on a speedy basis to those most in need. But the court, the tribunal, the social empowerment agency, when implementing and addressing this act, sir, must take into account certain guiding principles. Protection of the rights of persons with disabilities. The empowerment of persons with disabilities. The provision for persons with disabilities in need of care and support. The promotion of their welfare. Their protection from abuse, from neglect, from discrimination. And to ensure that Barbados, in all its forms, complies with our international treaty commitments and human rights commitments in relation to persons with disabilities and otherwise, because we can't just be signing conventions because it's pretty to do so and because it's fashionable, and then their tenets are not implemented in Barbados. And therefore, this act is saying that all those responsible for administering this act and making sure that it is complied with have to be guided by these principles, overall principles, and that is fine, sir. The issue of the Social Empowerment Agency, which will receive and investigate complaints alleging breach of this act. So for the first time in the history of Barbados, persons with disabilities, their caregivers, those responsible for them, sir, and their whole list of people, could be the doctors, their doctor, could be their teacher, will have an agency now that they can go to and make a complaint against someone, an entity, even a government agency, that they allege is breaching the rights of the persons with disabilities, sir. This is what this act is about, because implementation has to be a key. The Social Empowerment Agency is mandated to investigate the complaint. If it finds that it is of merit, it has the authority and power to intervene to try and reach a settlement on the issue. If no settlement is reached, you have the Disabilities Rights Tribunal, sir, an adjudicative body that has power to make binding decisions on the issues of the complaints, etc. Could be an issue, an employment issue, where a person with disability alleges that they did not get the job because they have a disability, sir. And that happens a lot in this country. Let's face fact that persons with disabilities apply for jobs, and on the face of it, on their application, there's no indication they have a disability, so they get through the door for the interview. That's the truth. But when they get through the door and the person, the interviewer or the group of interviewers see that they're in a wheelchair, the job dead. And they're qualified for the job, you know, sir. So let's put ourselves in that position. I certainly put myself in that. I feel I have the intelligence. I have the capacity to do this job. I can do it better than an able-bodied person. Because as the Honourable Member for St. Michael South said, invariably in a lot of cases they're doing the job better because they ain't gossiping on the cell phone all day on the net about who got who had who last night. They're doing work, they're happy for the job. And they're dedicating themselves to the job. Accommodations may have to be made for them, and what's wrong with that? To do the job. You might have to say, depending on the disability, okay, so you could come into work at 9:30 rather than 8:30, work till 5:30 when you're feeling better in the afternoon. Or you could work 2 days from home and maybe produce more than if you had to fight up with transportation to get to work. But COVID taught us that you could work from home too, remote work too. So it's the mindset that has to be changed in this country, both in government and in the private sector, as has been recognized, to give people an opportunity to fulfill their potential, as is their right as Barbadian citizens under the Constitution and laws of Barbados. So this is what this act is about. You could appeal if you feel aggrieved by the decision. You could appeal the decision of the Disabilities Rights Tribunal to the High Court judge, but that is fundamental, basic legislative rights of an individual. But when done and the court rule against you too, you got to comply, make some kind of restitution, compensation, whatever. So there's legislative equal protection, including protection from victimization and discrimination under this act. That's so important. That we have spent decades victimizing people with disabilities and discriminating against them in this country, sir. We spoke during the policy, many of us, that regrettably a lot of families were ashamed of their children or relatives who had disabilities. I used to keep them in the back room in the house. When people come to the house, they can't see them. Thankfully, those days are past. It wasn't the person with disability's fault that they have a disability. And the thing about it, sir, is that in a split second, anybody regrettably could get a disability. Yesterday, and I'm not going to call names, sir, but a person who was head of a leading government department in this country called me, fell down last month from a ladder, now has no sensitivity whatsoever from his chest down, including his hands. I can't get over it yet, sir. I know the person very, very well. Split second, off a ladder. Now whole life, don't know if the physiotherapy that he has to do over the next 6 months can make any difference. So this is why everybody ought to remain humble and respect people with disabilities, and that is why I get so vexed when I hear, as I did up to over the weekend, about people parking in car parks that reserved for people with disabilities, and not only doing that, but want to tell you about your mother and things about yourself that you never know about. That's the truth. Until they themselves get a disability or the close relative, regrettably, and they then understand and come to Christian understanding. So the penalty, and the law must have penalties, sir. It ought to be enforceable. So the penalties for exploiting people with disabilities or committing violence against them or neglecting or abusing them, $50,000 maximum. And abuse also includes economic and emotional and verbal and psychological, physical and sexual abuse. And the Honourable Member for St. Thomas has been at the forefront of speaking about elder abuse, which encompasses all these things. And elder abuse equals disabilities abuse in this case. I got people who exploit people with disabilities, take away the pension checks, don't support them. Same thing as the elderly, and verbally and emotionally and psychologically abuse them. So a penalty, the law gonna intervene in the future in this area. But the sexual and reproductive rights of persons with disabilities and any other human being are protected under this law. And they have to be, sir. Because you got people that get on like if people with disabilities, because you're blind or you're deaf, no, you should not have any sexual feelings. Or you should not explore your reproductive rights. The Honourable Member for St. Michael South spoke about the experience of Ms. Janelle Odell, member of the committee, one of the most absolutely brilliant people that I have met and that I know, distinctions, first class honors throughout. And somebody who should know better can look at her after her child born. How you gonna look after this child? My sister, sir, born deaf, understand? And I suppose God works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform, because her son and my daughter, my first child, born 4 months apart, virtually grew up together. When I out with my daughter and then my son on a Saturday afternoon, my nephew with me, and both of his parents deaf, and he now serving, advancing the law enforcement cause in this country, sir. Nothing wrong with persons with disabilities who can get children to get. But yes, as the Honourable Minister said, they're not to be exploited though. So those people who interfere with them sexually when they shouldn't be, now, again, the law coming down on them. Because you're not to take advantage of people just because they're vulnerable. So that is the line and distinction that has to be drawn in this situation, sir. The issue of the law, sir, this legislation will not be the be-all and end-all. In other words, we can't, after it's enacted, put out our hands and say, look, we've achieved, this is it. Because public awareness, public sensitization has to continue, must be a continuous process. So, sir, as the Honourable Minister said, we toyed up to recently with the idea of putting in quotas and percentages in terms of employment of persons with disabilities, that there should be X amount of percentage places reserved in government for persons with disabilities, that people in the private sector or employing over a certain amount of people should employ X number of persons with disabilities. And we came to the understanding, sir, because look, a lot of thought went into this, that we are not ready yet for that. Because we have to make sure the education process is in place and that the employment then can come about. So we remove those clauses from the legislation, sir, but memorandum of understanding have to be entered into with the private sector groups to employ persons with disabilities, sir, to give people with disabilities a chance. That's going to require a register of skills to be developed by the Social Empowerment Agency, will be responsible for it under the Ministry of People Empowerment. And we heard the Honourable Member for St. Michael South say today that since, for example, now, The Honourable Prime Minister, in her budgetary proposals last year, March 16th, I believe it is, and it came into effect October the 1st, widened the category of persons with disabilities, including children, who as of right now will get benefits, monetary benefits under the NIS. That persons with disabilities coming forward and register and saying what the skills are. So that has to be advanced so that a person in the private sector say, I want to give a person with disabilities a chance, but they got to be qualified, they got to merit it, can call the Ministry of People Empowerment and get and employ with persons with disabilities. And sir, the truth of the matter is, a lot of people in this country who give private sector people who give persons with disabilities a job or opportunity will tell you that they were happy they made that choice. But they have to be in a position to be able to make that choice. So hence, memorandum of understandings have to be developed between businesses and the Ministry of People Empowerment, between the Barbados Employees Confederation, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Ministry of People Empowerment to advance this cause, because it can't continue with a 90% rate of persons with disabilities being unemployed or not self-employed. In addition, companies and business entities need to be encouraged at least once a year, I would say twice a year, to host seminars for their employees, especially those who face the public, those in customer service, those who interact with the public, to make them more sensitive of the issues of persons with disabilities, sir. Because we heard numerous stories over the period of time of the commission of banks, sir. I say in banks, insurance companies, we can come more to the insurance company. Let's deal with the banks now. Having a lot of discriminatory policies against persons with disabilities. So there's a person with disabilities, nothing wrong with the head. They have a better brain than my brain. But yet, a bank person telling them, well, you got to bring your mother to open this account or to withdraw this money. That kind of foolishness. But you don't want your mother to know how much money you got. You ain't want your relative to know nothing about your personal affairs. Well, that is your right as a human being. But you being insulted and offended by someone at a bank who is telling you that you, just because you're in a wheelchair, for instance, that you don't have the capacity to make decisions as to your banking circumstances or your financial circumstances. No, that is where there's no sensitivity or understanding by a person at the front line of a bank in customer service on the issue of disabilities. And those things have to be changed. The National Council for the Disabled, the now National Disabilities Unit, to be social empowerment agency, has the capacity to train and has done in the past. Training courses, seminars, 1 day, half day, 2 a year, twice a year, to these institutions and establishments that treat into the public. They gain a lot of money from the public. And I want to suggest that if they become more favorable to persons with disabilities will spend money with them, will bank with them, and they will gain in terms of profit. Because a person with disabilities is not going at a bank that discriminating against them. Well, that is the reality. Well, that is common sense, business sense. But a lot of people, like, they don't consider people with disabilities. Same thing as our tourism product, and I've said this before, and the Honourable Minister of Tourism conceded, and previous minister too, when we met, when the committee met with the ministry, Barbados should become absolutely disability friendly and accessible, both for our own people and for tourists. More tourists will come if Barbados was fully accessible. We've been trying with it, sir, that is the truth. For about, I remember when the last government was in office, I was an opposition MP. I was invited to serve or at least be part of a panel discussion, I remember, on the issue. And you know, the people with disabilities worldwide are multimillionaires because they got large personal injury settlements, as you know, sir, from the incident that caused their disability. Some of them may have been rich even before that. So you're rich and you go up in the French Alps or the Swiss Alps, sir, and you're skiing and you break your back. But only rich people could go up in the French Alps and Swiss Alps and ski. So we have to make Barbadians understand that, look, there is financial benefit, in addition, obviously, to the moral right and authority of treating the people with disabilities and making Barbados fully favorable to people with disabilities. We have, sir, we're looking towards, and I know the Law Reform Commission has it before them, to have lasting or enduring power of attorneys legislation. Because like I said, the enactment of this legislation would not be the end all of it. And where situations where, as you know, Mr. Speaker, a power of attorney is no longer valid once the grantor of the power of attorney has mental incapacity. But England, for example, I think they amended their act in 2023, has taken into account those situations where you have now lasting and enduring power of attorneys. And this is key because right now the situation stands that a person, after they become mentally incapacitated, their power of attorney is no longer in effect, and their close relatives have to go to court now to get receivership, which costs a lot of money, sir, and is, you know, a maze of bureaucracy. So these are the issues that we are talking about. A lot of steps, tremendous progress has been made by the Ministry of People Empowerment over the last 3 years, especially on this issue. The 40% increase in subventions to organizations serving persons with disabilities, sir. Ministry of Housing, the 10% allocation of state housing and houses that are associated with the state being constructed to house persons with disabilities, the trust fund, which has helped tremendously persons with disabilities. Sir, it is a work in progress. It's not going to happen overnight, but we have started on the journey to make life better for persons with disabilities, to do good by persons with disabilities. I believe there's a proposal from the Constitutional Reform Commission to place disabilities, just like gender, just like sex, just like religious persuasion, among those protected categories of persons against whom it is unconstitutional to discriminate against. And I really look forward to that coming into play. Section 42 is a key section where every ministry, because as I said, we took out the percentage sector, but every ministry under Section 42 is mandated to employ qualified persons with disabilities. And the issues of education, where the Act speaks to the right to quality education on the basis of equal opportunity and training teachers for special needs schools, and the issue of individualize their educational plans to call for specific learning needs of students with disabilities. All of these are key components of this legislation, combined with the stated intention by the Ministry of Education to reopen Alma Parish School, which again the Honourable Member for St. Thomas has been calling for years. School should never have been shut, as it was by the last Democratic Labour Party government. But mindful still of the philosophy that even though you are looking to accommodate persons with disabilities as much as possible in mainstream schooling, you still recognize under this act, under this bill, that there are some students with disabilities who would have to go to special schools. And that is carrying out the philosophy of some education, some disability educational experts, such as Gary Hornby, who lives in Barbados, married to a Barbadian, who in his book, Inclusive Education at the Crossroads, Exploring Effective Special Needs Skills, Provision in Global Context, speaks about the need still, even though you have a concept of mainstreaming, to still have special schools for some persons with disabilities. The issue of employment is important. Equal access to opportunities for suitable employment, regardless of a person's disability, and the burden of proof, so important, shall be on the employer to establish satisfactory reasons for denying a person with disability employment or employment rights. And they could be taken before the Social Empowerment Agency and the Disabilities Rights Tribunal to show that burden of proof. The issue of health care, very, very key, sir. Persons with disabilities must have same access to the same range and standards of affordable healthcare services as provided to persons without disabilities. And the medical and paramedical personnel must be trained to deal with this. So you've had situations where deaf persons go to a polyclinic, for instance, and the name call, in other words, we're ready to see you, but they don't know because the personnel there don't recognize that as a deaf person. And there isn't anything visual that they could look up to see their number or whatever. And go along because the person say, well, they ain't here to go along, but the deaf person sitting down right there. So that is the type of everyday challenge that you have. The Act deals with service animals, and that is key too. The ability of blind persons to come into Barbados and to travel with service animals is addressed here. And national emergencies, whereby under the Act that the Ministry of Home Affairs, People's Empowerment mandated to make sure that persons with disabilities in an impending disaster are protected, are placed a safe haven. And from the time I was Minister of Home Affairs, sir, we had, as you know, shelters specifically assigned to persons with disabilities, hurricane shelters. So all of these are issues aimed to improve the lives of persons with disabilities. Persons with disabilities to be taken into account on policies aimed at combating climate change. So important. So, sir, I would want to end on just one issue. You want to? No? Okay.
Honourable Leader for Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 10 minutes past 4.
The question is that this honourable chairman be suspended until 4:10 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. This honourable chairman stands suspended until 4:10 p.m.